Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the City of Farmers Branch Study Session meeting. It is Tuesday, September 6, 2022. The time is 3 p.m. We will begin with A1, discuss regular agenda items. Start to my right. Councilmember Merritt, do you have anything?
Mayor, I was able to review the items. I didn't have anything in the consent. There's a lot of detail there, but I think all were fairly well explained. So no questions at this time. Thank you.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yeah, Mayor, I have a question on H16, the SINLAC Support Center. The $315,000 for the trash removal on that site, was that anticipated in the original budgeted amount of $1.9 million? Or was the trash thing or the landfill, TECQ landfill thing sort of an unexpected?
No, that was anticipated because the whole site's on a landfill. The one thing we were looking at is going with methane detectors inside the building, so there was going to be a lot of hoops we were going to have to jump through, and in this case, it was best to just go ahead and dig up the trash, and that way that mitigate the risk for the building and the people in there.
So the total amount of $1.964 million that was budgeted for this project, that $315,000 was anticipated within that amount?
Yes, and just to give you a little background, I've been here 15 years, and this service center as a whole has been my project. We just we had to split the site, and we built the Keenan Service Center a couple of years ago, which was part of the entire project. And at the end of the day, we had this much money, and now I was told we have only $2 million left to get as much as you can done, so it doesn't really build to the master plan, so we're trying to do with what we have. So.
Yeah, the existing building's been there since 1967.
Yes.
I was born that year.
Oh, okay.
It's an old building, so
yes.
I'm kind of interested to see the new building, and I certainly don't want it to be full of methane when we do. So.
Yes, and we've been like on the roof pushing it to try and keep that afloat. We just had some leaks last week, and it's like $160 to put a new roof on, but
right. Okay.
A lot of stuff going on. So.
All right, actually, that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Driscoll.
No, I'm good right now. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Roman.
Yes, I have a question on item H4, specifically page 7 under active portfolio management. I kind of was looking for a little clarity as to why we've chosen to move forward with that specific investment philosophy. I'm kind of just pulling from my experience in the industry, and the golden standard has always been passive investment management, and so it's a little different in this world, so I kind of wanted to understand the rationale behind that.
Thank you for the question. In terms of our overall philosophy with respect to our invested assets, we typically, as I've talked about in many of the quarterly updates, we typically will work to, as we have assets that are available for investment, a pool of cash has come in, sometimes that can be via debt issuance or any number of things. We typically will work as an investment committee to look for the safest ways to invest those funds to make the most use of our financial resources. And then once those funds are invested, we hold those funds until maturity unless there's some unforeseen reason why we would need to liquidate an investment.
So, and that unforeseen reason that we could sell out of a specific investment would include making a guess as to what the market is going to be doing?
No, that's not typically the reason we would liquidate an investment. And honestly, it doesn't happen often, so I want to state that part first. It might have happened once or twice since I've been with the city, and today's my 6-year anniversary. Typically, those investments, the reason we would sell a position has more to do with some sort of the cash flow need. We need to pull back an investment, put it back in the form of cash for some sort of unforeseen cash flow need. But again, our overall policy with respect to investments is to hold those until maturity.
So under an active portfolio management here, it reads, "The city shall pursue an active versus a passive portfolio management philosophy. That is, securities may be sold before they mature if market conditions present an opportunity."
And I'm explaining to you that our practice is not to sell to try to beat the market. Our practice is to hold those investments to maturity, just to make sure we wouldn't invest in anything that we felt the need to liquidate a position just because of market conditions. But we constantly evaluate if we're in, we're following our policy to make sure that we're not risking providing undue risk to any of the city's financial assets in the types of investments that we will put those funds into. And then thereafter, they're typically there unless there's some sort of a cash need for them to not be there.
Yeah, and it just, to be quite honest, it seems like what you've just described is a passive investment philosophy. And so I just want to make sure that I'm fully in support of doing that, what you just described, but it doesn't seem that that's what we're exactly doing. So how would we go about making sure that what we're doing falls in line with what's notated here?
Would you prefer to amend the word passive for active and adopt that particular item as stated? Would that be?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
I
Let's do
think
that.
so, yeah, because in the investment world, passive and active are drastically different investment philosophies, so I just want to make sure that we're doing what's prudent, and that's certainly what I would recommend to any of my clients.
Perfect, let's do that.
Any other questions?
I'm good, thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Next is A2, receive biannual update from the Historical Preservation and Restoration Board. Today's presentation will be delivered by Mrs. Dowers.
Hello. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Missy Dewars, and I am on the Historical Board. Our mission today is to collect, preserve, interpret, and celebrate the history of the United States and Texas with the emphasis of Peters Colony and Farmers Branch. Our vision, I want you all to pay attention to our vision, to provide visitors high-quality programs, exhibits, and events through living history and mission-based education with a goal of becoming a fully accredited museum that offers programming which will link our past to our future. Oh, thank you. The right one. There you go. Thank you. That's our mission. Our board, sorry, I'm off. Okay. Our meetings are held every fourth Thursday of every month. We welcome any visitor to attend our meetings. Our overall board membership participation is up 80% from previous years. Our board's very active in supporting the historical park. Our board accomplishments as of today: our board chair, Johannes, has tapped into his 20 years experience and knowledge as a cemetery manager and has consulted with Parks and Rec staff on the best method for installing the name unknown headstones at Keenan Cemetery. Then the Parks, with the staff supervision of Eagle Scout candidate Adrian Wilson of Troop 712, installed the first 4 unknown grave markers, and eventually all unmarked graves will have a name unknown marker to designate their final resting place. We also had Cub Scout Pack 713 out to decorate all the veteran graves with American flags in honor of Memorial Day. This ongoing partnership with Cub Scout 713, where they place the flags for Memorial and Veterans Day, was an initiative started by our former chair and newly reappointed member, Ann Christman. The Historical Park Board assisted the Friends of the Historical Park and raised $962 at the chair rental booth during the Independence celebration. It was a sellout with all the chairs being rented. Why is this important to spotlight? The Friends of the Historical Park is because they provide grant funding to the park for summer camp scholarships. They pay for specialized cleaning services for the historical structures, and they also enhance our community program and special events by covering the operational expenses such as catering, licensing, and other supplies. In fact, the Easter egg hunt that we had back in April would not have been a success unless we had them, because we were able to get nonprofit status. They have a nonprofit status. They have the C, or the 51C, 3C nonprofit status. And we were able to seek donations from businesses that they only donate to the nonprofit organizations. This event brought in over $8,500 in admissions and revenue. We also had 4 or 5 board members very involved in soliciting donations, and they provided hot dogs and ice cream, and they also went out and provided, they solicited to get donations to make this event very successful. Our accomplishments at the park to date. Speaking of our revenue, the historical park has reached ever be seen totals unlike other departments within the city. The historical park's funding comes from the hotel occupancy tax, not the general fund. Over the past several years, staff has worked hard to bring more awareness and visitors to the facility by offering unique programs and classes. That hard work has paid off, and we are seeing unprecedented revenue totals and attendance. Whether it's the Easter egg hunt, the classic car show, the Mad Hatter tea, the DIY furniture series, the cookie decorating, the charcuterie board making, the Girl Scout workshops, award-winning camps, and our beloved and long-running Christmas tree tea. The amount of people coming to the historical park is something to take notice of. At our last board meeting, with Councilman Jackson attended, thank you for attending, we discussed the third quarter report. The year-to-date third quarter of this year, 21 to 22, has generated almost $135,000 in overall revenue. That's programs and classes, admission fees, rentals, special events, school tours, etc. This is the most the historical park has seen. That is an 84% increase, or an additional $61,000 compared to the third quarter of last year. Aside from this increased revenue, we also saw an increase in visitation, engagement, and activation of the historical park. Attendance for the third quarter of last year was 10,550, while this year we have had 24,848 people, and an increase of 135%. And with that continuing, to see more and more non-residents of Farmers Branch enjoying the programs and events. This is why the newest center that we would like to have, the event center, is so important for our community to keep growing in the historical park, to keep making a vision in Farmers Branch. So our event calendar update. Before the event center construction can begin, 3 log structures need to be disassembled and relocated. At the May 3rd council meeting, the resolution awarding Phoenix One Restoration and Construction the contract to disassemble 3 log structures, and which was unanimously approved by the council. Phoenix One has begun to disassemble the buildings. They have completed the documenting, numbering, and tagging of each board and material, and the physical assembly is underway. The event center construction bid was sent out. However, one proposal was submitted past the deadline, and the other is currently being reviewed by the Economic Development Administration, the federal agency. It's a federal agency. We have received the $1.4 million grant funding this project. We should have the ruling from the EDA in the next couple of weeks. If the bidder is approved for the project, we will need to bid again. With extreme limited indoor space at the historical park, the event center would allow limitless opportunities for the historical park and the city, not just for rentals of weddings, corporate events, or social engagements, but for programs and classes. All of our summer camps were sold out, oversold actually this year. We had to turn away families because we did not have enough indoor space to hold everyone who was interested in attending. Our upcoming activities, our future, we have the Viva Farmers Branch event that will be held here soon is for the Hispanic Heritage Month. We have Blooming Grass is a yearly favorite. We have the Day of the Dead. There will be a 2-night free event featuring community altar, and people are encouraged to attend and place a photo of remembrance in honor of their loved one. In November, we have a DIY class to build a canjo, which is a banjo made from a can. Raymond Watkins is a local artist, and he sells his canjos at the Blooming Festival every year. He has now agreed to teach us how to make them. We'll round out the year with our second annual Classic Car Show, Christmas teas, and holiday exhibits, traditions around the world, and a spotlight holiday customer and ritual of various countries around the world. There are so many positive things happening at the park. I look forward to telling you what else we're going to do at the next biannual council update. Any questions?
Ms. Dowers, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to thank not only you, but Mr. Hilkema, Mrs. Kidd. Yeah.
Good.
Thanks for your leadership, all that y'all are doing at the park. The attendance, the growth, all the excitement that we've seen there the last few years has been tremendous, and that wouldn't be possible without you all and
Staff.
y'all's advice on what we should do there. So greatly appreciate that. I do have one question.
Yes.
Is that charcuterie board class a BYOW or?
Yes, it is. We have to have a
Okay.
liquor license. So
Yeah.
yes, it is. Come join.
Yes. Does anyone else have any questions at this time? Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say, the historical park is one of my favorite places in Farmers Branch.
Right.
Don't tell Chief Hale, he thinks the jail is my
Oh,
favorite
okay.
place. But hey, Chief. So Johannes, Hillary, thank you so much for your leadership and all that you have done and contributed. I know it requires a lot of time, but I know it's in your heart. We see that in what you've been able to provide for Farmers Branch. And I'm really excited about where this is going, particularly with the new event center. I do have one question because obviously I'm coming in sort of midstream with the event center. We have a $1.4 million grant.
Yes.
Right? And is there a timetable for us on that grant to use the grant, or we lose it, or?
He's going to. Our parks.
Most things in life are use it or lose it.
Thank you.
Mike Mashburn, Director of Parks and Rec. Yeah, we have 2 years to use it from when the grant was awarded. So
And then we lose it.
And when was that, when was it awarded, do we know?
just
Approximately.
roughly a few months ago. I'll have to pull the exact date for you if you're
Okay.
interested. Yeah.
Okay. And have we looked into, we need another 2.6 million from understanding, right, for the barn, like $4 million is the total cost, is that right?
To be determined. So when we originally bid the project, it was 3.5. That same bidder in this process came back at 4.3. The bidder that was late was at 3.8. So somewhere in that neighborhood. I have no idea where it will be in a few months because this is a crazy moving target. But
Sure.
maybe better as things slow down with the housing market. Who knows?
Have prior council meetings discussed potentially selling naming rights or getting corporate donors to engage here financially just to help us out in the times that we're in?
I would help with that if that's what needs to be done.
You'll write a check?
No, I won't write a check personally, but I'll find some people that will.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think in Michael's business plan, there was certainly opportunities for things like that. That would have to be approved by council, obviously,
Sure.
but we think that would be attractive with the amount of visitors that would attract and citizens as well. I think there's an opportunity there for sure.
Okay, great. I was just curious about that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Anyone else have anything else? Councilmember Roman.
I always get so excited to hear any updates from the historical park. Obviously, it's near and dear to me because that's where I got started.
Yes.
And, you know, Johannes and you have been great leaders in the board, and I certainly look forward to what the other things that you guys have planned in the historical park. And if you guys ever need a volunteer, you know where to find me.
Yes, Omar, I have your
Thank
number.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Thank you. All right. Next is A3, discuss the proposed fiscal year 2022-23 balanced budget and proposed current year amended budget. Ms. Evans-Jones, before you get started, I know how hard you and your team have worked on this budget for about 6 months. I see you come in on the weekends while I'm playing tennis. I think I yell at you from time to time to let you know I'm just checking in. Not really, just trying to get some exercise. But, at our last council meeting, I want to apologize to you and your team. I failed and let some former residents, or I guess not former residents, former council members and residents make some disparaging and untoward comments towards you and your team. And I should have set that down, and it caught me off guard. And I want to let you know that I'm going to be better, not only tonight, in the future, because you don't deserve that. You're a valuable member of this team, and the work that you do is tremendous, and it's, resembled in the fact that you win an award every year for transparency and the work that you do on this budget and how we deliver to that public. And so I just want you to know that that's not taken for granted, and that I apologize, and I want to say that publicly because, I'm embarrassed for allowing that to happen, especially on my watch. So I just want to say I'm sorry, but hopefully it doesn't happen again. Hopefully some people find their manners and some couth and come up here with a little bit more respect next time. And so with that, I'm excited to hear some of the updates that you have, because I know it's a constant moving target around here around budget season, but looking forward to the presentation, and thank you.
Thank you for those words, Mayor. Sherelle Evans-Jones, Director of Finance, and I'm here today to provide some updates in terms of where we stand with the budget process. Okay, so this is kind of what my life has started to look like during the budget process, just sticky notes and things all over the place. I've kind of divided this presentation up into things that I know that we already had on the agenda to talk about. You may sense and feel in the presentation that I'm listening to what types of questions that we're getting from our council, from our public, and I'm trying my very best to provide fact-based information. Whatever you as a council decide to do with respect to the budget is between you and your constituents, but you are going to do it in the face of facts. So with that information, let's get going on talking about the 22-23 budget. So we got multiple balls in the air at this point. The 22-23 budget, I'm making you aware that the document that was included in your council packet, so it was a huge one, it's basically an additional electronic copy of an updated electronic copy of the budget book that you received in the past. And what has changed with that document with respect to the 22-23 numbers are the things that we've talked about during our last, I guess that was August 16th, budget meeting and council item. So those include the funding that and all of these things sounded like we had unanimous support for among our council, the MetroCrest services funding, additional pay for public service, neighborhood investment in Sharrows, neighborhood repair program, and so there was $100,000 additional made available for that, but it'll be paired with some funding with respect to our neighborhood partnership program that was in a different fund. So we've kind of combined those to make a total of 150 that would work there. Additionally, we've talked about the whole 25-20 with respect to TMRS and a way that we can kind of spread out those costs among the different funds that we have employees. And so those are kind of the key changes that have been made with respect to the 22-23 budget. I hear this a lot, like, your budget is bigger than it was before. What are y'all doing? et cetera. And so I just want to show this, and I think this is based on the proposed number. I should have, no, it's revised. So this is based on the revised numbers that we have presented in the updated packet. And what I'm trying to show here this is the whole ball game, right here, all funds, general fund on down. And you are absolutely right. If a member of the public or someone were to say, oh my goodness, your budget has increased by $30 million or 20%, that is absolutely a true statement. That is absolutely a true statement. But what is also a true statement is the lion's share of that movement comes with respect to capital projects, that fund, and the lion's share of that movement is related to the multi-sport complex for $22.3 million, which all of us know is fully funded by someone else. We all know that, right? So I'm wanting to make sure that we understand that, yes, while we have big movements between last year and this year's budget, the majority of it is borne by a third party and is providing an asset in this community that will enable our citizens and residents to be able to enjoy, in addition to bringing more people to the Farmers Branch area. Next, I wanted to point out and talk about some of the movements, like when I do this kind of thing where I take last year compared to this year, lay out the difference, percentage change, that's in my roots as an auditor. That's in my roots as an auditor because I want to know what's going on, what's moving, what's changing in the numbers, and this is the best way. There are other ways, but this is the best way where I can see it. So I've talked about this huge movement. Another movement in the numbers is with respect to general fund. Big movement compared to a $175 million budget. $7.8 million, the lion's share of that movement between police and fire is what that additional $7.8 million is paying for. So that is your additional officers that we've talked about, the 4 officers plus the special investigator for the police department, total of 5 people. That is the additional personnel within the fire department. That has to do with mental health services that the police officers have asked for. That these additions have to do with making sure that our public safety officials have the fleet, the vehicles that they need. So those are some of the major movements within this area. Also, what's driving this $7.8 million has to do with changes and increased expenditures with respect to the landfill. So the landfill, you may recall from our budget retreat, also has an accompanying increase to its revenue, because what the plan is there are some additional tonnages that we believe will come in. They are tied to and related to additional revenues that will also come to the city. And the last area, like, my mind tends to look for where are the big movers, what is happening with these numbers. Parks and Rec is another area that has big movement. It also has lots of city assets that are related to it in terms of its buildings, the rec center, the aquatic center. Those are heavy capital intensive facilities. And in addition, there are some fixed asset related purchases, generators, et cetera, to make sure that those facilities are taken care of in the event of calamity, which we tend to have those in our community and I shouldn't even say from time to time, it happens. And then what I'm saying here is, if I were to go through this $7.8 million and pick out all the big movers that had big chunks of money, those are your 4. Everything else, it's 10 other departments there, is $1.8 million, okay? There are other movements in terms of expenditures within several of these other funds. Nothing, things go down, things go up, nothing stays the same. We have during the course of our budget retreat, provided updates and details in terms of what the other movements within the funds entail. I'll just mention that this increase here on debt service has everything to do with the additional facility, the first year's debt service payments related to the multi-sport complex. Okay? Wanted to take some time in there because we can be afraid of $175 million, but I want to make sure that we understand what is moving within there. That's kind of all I had to talk about with respect to the 22-23 budget. I'm going to move forward to the 21-22 budget. So this is where we talked about, long time ago when we started this process, we talked about that there would be a time frame where we receive information as the finance department from all of our departments. They utilize information to the latest information in terms of expenditures, how fast or slow expenditures are running, and they provide us an update to where they think their year-end budgets will land. We like to do that as late as possible in the process because we want to minimize what we're guessing at. You understand? So for that reason, it doesn't come at the same time as a 22-23 budget, nor should it, because the guess wouldn't be as tight. Okay? With that information, I'll let you know that your 22-23 year-end budget has been updated. So the big document that you received the electronic copy of has columns in it that were always there. These columns that are marked amended budget 21-22 and the actuals, both of those columns have been updated. We put as close as possible to actual information for when we were pulling together the document, and the amended budget represents feedback from each of the departments, the divisions, to be able to provide us the best available information. With that best available information, we go through the process of looking at where we believe expenditures will land based on where we believe the revenues will land based on how things are trending, and that information enables us to be able to kind of update our overall forecast. I'm going to give you it kind of from a 100-foot level, and then we'll kind of drill into what's going on with the 21-22 budget. Generally speaking, expenditures came in less than expected, which is what you want. You don't want them coming in more than expected. So general fund, for example, was $482,000, or, I mean, it's less, but, that's a big number to my pocket, to your pocket, but it's also like 1% of the overall general fund budget, less than 1% of the overall general fund budget. The story is that the revenues came in way better than expected. And so as a result, if you were to look at what the net impact of general fund was before I gave you this update to 21-22 compared to what it is now, general fund is doing $6.26 million better than we thought it would be based on the original budget. Water and sewer doing $3.89 million better than what we thought. Hotel motel, $839. And let's drill into some of these and talk about a little bit more of what's driving those changes and what's driving the positive improvement. Sales tax. So what I'm showing you here is what our original plan was, that is in the adopted budget column, and what our amended budget, what we amended those numbers to be in the updated document that you received. And if you were to open the general fund, and I'm only speaking on general fund, big changes on general fund on this slide. If you were to open the page that has all of the revenues for general fund, it's 2 pages worth of, and that's the summarized information. What I'm trying to pull out here are the key movers, the key areas where we have lots of money and things that came in way differently than expected. The ball game is the $5.5 million of additional revenue with respect to sales tax. Hey, Sherelle, what's going on there? How'd that happen? Well, one thing to note is that the comptroller's office is projecting their sales tax overall statewide will be coming in heavier larger than their expectation. They're projecting a 15% increase in statewide sales tax revenue. Ours is more than that. So part of the joy of being an accountant and being a CPA is that each year in your birthday month, you have to turn in a whole bunch of CPE, continuing professional education credits. My birthday is this month. So I was attending some sessions here recently. So in addition to trying to get all of your questions answered about the budget, I got a license to keep up as well. One of those sessions that I attended had to do with the economy overall, and a well-educated gentleman from Deloitte & Touche, one of their economists, got up and talked about some of the things that are happening nationally with respect to spending. And one of those things that, as I'm thinking about my numbers and what's going on here in Farmers Branch, that hit me as to what he said was, what's happening overall is that we had a pandemic. Everybody went in the house. Everybody was stuck. What we are experiencing now, statewide, nationally, has to do with a good number of people, and everybody is going to be different, but a good number of people that have what this economist referred to as pent-up savings, unspent savings. You didn't take that trip. You didn't, eat out as much as you normally would. And so what we are seeing, what I believe that we're seeing in these numbers and what the state is seeing in numbers overall, has to do with post-pandemic spending, because a ton of funding might be available. And I believe that what we're seeing is, remember all the shipping containers that were stuck in the waters of California? Now that supply chain issue has been remedied, and you see just a lot more spending overall, not just in Farmers Branch, but I think that has a great deal to do with, and we have a really outstanding third party that's working on our behalf, and some of that also is reflected in these numbers as well. Don't get excited. Don't get excited. 23-24. So bear in mind, and we have talked about as a smaller group, and maybe we should spend more time with the public, making sure that they understand that there is some legislation that is on the tracks right now that has the great potential to reduce our ability to earn or receive sales tax. It has to do with the change in the way or the method in which individual cities are credited for their sales tax revenue, changing it to a destination, and that we've done some work in that. As of a study that was conducted about 1.5 years ago, that has the great potential to reduce our sales tax revenue by about $5.5 million or more a year, okay? Why am I telling you this? Why are we talking about 23, 24 and beyond right now? Because it matters what you do with the resources you have in front of you right now, okay? Put a pin in that. Remember, I'm telling you, we got some 23, 24 legislation. It's going to come back. So, all of the above or the previous information had to do with the general fund and revenues and things like that that are changing with respect to general fund. So let's talk water sewer, because that's another one of those areas that I had listed that had big changes. I talked about the revised revenue for water sewer fund is projecting $29.4 million for the 21-22 budget. When we adopted the budget, we projected 25.5. That's the difference that I just referred to, the 3.89. Hey, Sherelle. So what's going on there? If water rates have not increased since 2019-20 year, hey, Sherelle, what's going on? This is a chart showing consumption with the Red line being current year, and we scheduled it out as far as, you notice it stops in August because, we're still gathering that information, but we wanted to present apples to apples in the months that are available. And the green line being last year. These things in January, February, March, April, May, you could say that they kind of are running net. One's a little better than the other here, but you kind of make up but you do see what I see, right? You do see this red line spiking up to the sky, right? That has everything to do with how the revenue for the water sewer fund played out. Nothing has changed in the rates. Everything has changed in terms of the consumption. One of my previous presentations, I think, Councilmember Roman, you asked about, how does that work? And, I talked some about the dry season, the wet season consumption, and I went back and pulled this data together to try to show you what exactly I meant by that. So I share that information in the spirit of helping us to understand what's driving those numbers and those differences. So this is kind of a question point and a decision point. You don't need to make any, provide me any information right this second, but let me walk you through it. We'll come back to it and allow for some discussion and some further understanding. So, not reflected in this $72.54 million worth of expenditures are the following things. There's about $2.65 million of interim city manager authorized expenditures and reallocations. And we have some items here for council consideration as well. So everything that's in this column, general fund, especially the expenditures that are sitting there will come to an end when the clock strikes September 30th, 2022. Everything unspent in here is dead, okay? So what I'm presenting here to you for your consideration is ways that we can use our funding to be able to move those items to fund things that have to do with long-term capital projects that may benefit us in the future and keep us from having to scrounge and try to figure out how to save for it in a future year. One of those items is a $1.2 million transfer that we would make with your consent to the non-bond CIP fund to fund Parks Master Plan and streets. So that would be $600,000 apiece. That will be in addition to what's already there for the current year for the 22-23 year. It would provide additional funding. But again, those are projects that trying to listen to y'all. Those are projects that I heard and what felt like in this discussion were important to many of you around the dais. The second opportunity has to do with a $200,000 transfer to that same fund related to Justice Center renovations. So included in the budget already and it's funded via ARPA, the ARPA funding, it is plans to update and renovate the Justice Center. We've talked about that. What was originally contemplated in the Justice Center renovation had to do with updating the jail section. And as you kind of heard with Mike Mashburn talking about how project costs go up, et cetera, what we are aware of is that it will take an additional $200,000 to finish that jail off the way that was originally shown and communicated to our officers who really would like to get some benefit with respect to having a better facility in which to work. So one opportunity is, instead of letting this funding die, you can transfer it over to non-bond CIP to make that project more of what we originally envisioned it to be. Last thing in terms of opportunities is a $100,000 transfer to non-bond CIP to increase monument signage. That was one that we kind of, listening and hearing what people did or didn't want to cut during our conversations, that was one area that I thought might be of interest to some or many of you around the dais. Same thing here. $28.09 million worth of expenditures. Same thing will happen there. They will die if they're not used or moved into an area that provides lasting benefit to the city. One proposal is to transfer $1.6 million to the non-bond utility fund to cover Cooks Creek projects after we have received the bid related to that project, and this is kind of like a, late breaking, this just in type thing, we learned that that project will cost significantly, $1.6 million more than was originally planned. So those are some areas for your contemplation. I'm going to sit that right there. I'm going to continue to push forward, and we'll come back and allow for some discussion and consideration. So we've done two things. We've talked about next year, we've talked about this year. Let's move forward with no, we're not going back into that. That's what we're not going to do. There. Okay. So remember during the budget retreat how I was explaining that SB2 has lasting impacts on the city's financial situation. You can trim, you can cut, you can reduce a tax rate, and it has lasting impacts throughout multiple years. I'm going to try to show that to you as best I can. Uh-oh. Sherelle has taken you to the Excel spreadsheet. Can everybody see that okay? Should I make it bigger? It's good? Okay. Cancel that. Okay. So let me start by explaining this. The way that the calculations happen with respect to SB2 is very complicated. The form that we use to figure out how much that tax rate needs to be according to that new law is probably 9 pages, small font, front and back. It resembles a tax form, and it has to do with adding line 2, subtract this, divide. It's just like it's worded and it's done similar to like a 1040 or some sort of tax form. This calculation is pretty complicated, and it has to do with removing and trying to right size your tax levy for any given year, to remove any new things that wouldn't have been counted, to remove TIFs, to remove debt service. So I'm just trying to, what I'm about to show you is not going to be that. I'm trying to show you how this works in a simplistic manner. So let's say in some fictitious world, a municipal organization has an overall valuation of $1 million. It's not us, because our valuation is $8 billion, okay? And let's say that that tax rate is 25 cents. So overall revenue to the city is $2,500. You with me? Okay. And let's say in year 2, because we live in a world right now where valuations are increasing, et cetera. Let's say in year 2, that fictitious city had a 10% increase in their tax rate. What SB2 requires is for you to figure out what rate you have to assess in order to still generate that same $2,500. So you will notice that the 25 cent goes down to 22.7 in order to get to that same rate. And then SB2 says you can add 3.5% on top. You with me? Okay. In year 3, just to vary things up, let's say there's an 8% increase. The calculation requires you to figure out what change you have to make to this 22.7 in order to get down to that same 25.88. And that requires you to lower that tax rate even further, you see? So I'm going to show this. These two are the same. And we're doing some subtraction on the side here. Let's say that in this fictitious world, they decided to lower the tax rate by 5 cents, okay? So you will see the reduction, the immediate reduction there. But what you will also see is how that change cascades down through multiple years and multiple budget years. So I'm showing you as our council and our public this to help you to kind of understand the implications of a change. I'm not saying this to be, you know, the mean finance person. My role in this process is to provide you information and to help provide financial advice to you. What I also want to call you back to is, remember that thing that we put a pin in maybe about 5 minutes or so ago, where I talked about the sales tax issue that was coming up for 23-24? Let's play this out in our mind. Let's say we cut that tax rate this year. So what's going to happen in year 2, the year that they are doing things that impacts one of our 2 greatest revenue sources within general fund? The ball game is property tax, the ball game is sales tax. And I'm telling you that sales tax is under threat. So where you believe you can lean on that number, you may not be able to. And that may be a choice that you're comfortable with, and it's up to you as the elected officials to decide. I just want you to have a general understanding of how these things flow through and how for multiple years you may have, you may be receiving the impact of something that you did in year 1. Okay. That wasn't so bad. You went to Excel and you made it. So that was what I wanted to show you there with that modeling exercise. One conversation we've also been having has to do with the reserve policy. And that reserve that is shown on our appendix page. Changes to the reserve policy require council approval. So this is another question point, another decision point, because if we're coming back in our next council meeting with the overall budget, if we're going to change the reserve policy, we may as well do it there so that the numbers are all properly stated, okay? So one thing, I believe that the way that we have the general fund in terms of its percentages is probably right. From a professional perspective, I don't recommend any changes there. The one thing that you have to think about as well with respect to making changes to these reserve policies is you want to pick something that you can hit, because if we are picking this and we didn't make it, lower this, etc. This is the page in particular that many people from a regulatory perspective like to review. And if we see it moving around or bumping around, it indicates that we are making stuff up. And so what I'm recommending here might be some ranges that would enable us to make sure that we don't go below the low end of the target, et cetera. So what you'll see here is a recommendation to consider for water sewer, a range of $2 million to $2.5 million. Similar with hotel motel, that's the one in particular that I know our team that works so hard at that is so excited about seeing the numbers getting bigger. So, you know, that I would recommend a range of $600,000 to $1 million with respect to that. And then our fixed asset, although that is showing right now over the target amount of $300,000, we know where each one of those pieces of additional funding is going within the book. it has details for each of those areas where spending is being accumulated in anticipation of some spend. Fixed assets tends to be an area where we will reserve money, we will save money in anticipation of a larger spend, like for a fire truck. Okay? So that was just a little bit about the reserve policy. Do we want to talk water proposal? All right. Okay, so I included just a screenshot of that there, but let me go back and get something for you. Because I was concerned at the way that we talked about this particular thing during our budget retreat. And it may not make a difference one bit or another, but I know that when we came to this portion of the budget retreat, I was on day 2, like in the afternoon, and we started talking about it, and I was like, I have slides for this to maybe explain this a little bit better, and y'all were like, no, let's talk about it, and maybe we should show these. So I haven't made any amendments or revisions to this, but I will show you what I had prepared, and then I'll do a little bit of information to kind of update you on some, some more current information that I have. So 74% of the city's property is commercial. We have more than 3,400 water accounts. Our average residential bill is less than $100, about $94 and some change. And again, some of the details there in terms of the increases. And this is the projected balance before we just did that work, okay? So this is a presentation that was made for you, is that a month ago? My goodness gracious. Okay, so the proposal would be to reduce the base rate by half, and that's the way that we arrive at the $132. We established in past budget discussions that 1 cent to the average property of $327,100. I've mentioned the average property so many times that I just say at the 327, and I believe you to know what I'm talking about. But when you use 327,000, which is our average value, and you factor in homestead exemption, which most of our properties have, that equates out, a 1 cent property tax reduction is $26. So 26 goes into 132 5 times. That's how we arrive at the 5 cent rate reduction. And it's going to be different based on the value of your property. That total cost is $1.15 million in terms of a use of fund balance. And then I just kind of included some information here in terms of what, an overall, an average increase to property tax payments. We calculated that out based on our 327,000, and that total increase was $274. So with this proposal, we would be taking away about half of that increase, okay? And then I had included information here, and what I was trying to show here is, some cities, and this could have changed because all, cities are going through this process. So some cities are considering leaving their tax rate the same. Some cities are considering a rate reduction. But you have to look at the whole picture. And so one of the things that was of interest is we have rate reduction in terms of the tax rate, but we also have increases in other areas. So you kind of have to guard against looking at, or not guard against, but make sure that when you're looking at other cities and what they are doing, that you have a more complete picture of what they're doing, because everybody has their own pressures, their own financial setup that's going to be different in each municipal organization. Okay, so that's that whole thing, but I have a little bit more information. Thank y'all for taking this tour all around my little spreadsheets and stuff. So this is a little bit more additional information. So I said the fund balance was that $3 million number. Now I'm telling you and I'm showing you that that target, that fund balance has been updated because of the update of the 21-22 information. We estimate the fund balance at the end of the 22-23 year to be about $6 million. That is not irrespective of that 1.6 million that I provided as an option to transfer to cover the Cooks Creek project. But it is, even with that, it is significantly larger than the $2 million or 2.5 million if you are interested in that targeted balance. One thing that was interesting, another thing that was interesting. So I pulled the details to tell me how many properties are at or below my average. And I'm telling you that this provides financial benefit to 62% of the residential parcels. This number is half, in terms of the average value of our property, but it represents over 5,600 parcels of our residential parcels and provides benefit to, it provides benefit to everyone, but it provides benefit of at least a 5-cent, the equivalent of a 5-cent reduction to 62% of the residential parcels within our community. And I went to look at what 132 represents to, because, this means different things to different people, right? Different things to different properties. So I went to look at and run that same number based on a property that was valued at $800,000 with a homestead exemption. And like I said before, everybody receives some sort of benefit with this. It's going to vary if you have larger property, but that 132 still does provide about a 2 3/4 cent rate, the equivalent of a 2.75 cent property tax rate reduction to somebody in a home in an $800,000 home with a homestead exemption. Everybody's getting something. You're right, they're getting it at different rates. Okay. And then our resident graphic guru and we teamed up to make some, it's always got to be some pretty stuff in terms of slides and graphics. So what this represents is we know what the city of Carrollton does a great job, and I heard from a few other cities that they grab that document as well that provides like comparison of tax rates and a number of things for quite a few cities. And so we use those tax rates within that tax rate-based comparison. But you can't just, to put this apples to apples, what we did is we used those rates. We used, if there was an existing homestead exemption, we calculated it out, but we calced it using our average. Now, we know that the same house picked up and put in Dallas, picked up and put in Plano is going to be different. And we know that cities are basing their tax rate, to some extent based on their historic valuations, et cetera. But if we were going to compare what I was trying to do with this and using the expert graphics of our communications team is to try to set that level. To try to compare that out using all, as best we can, the same information. And given that we rank pretty low. Let me see, I believe we have one more piece of information here. And what we did with that same information in terms of property taxes is we layered on what the cost would be for water, drainage, all of the full-in charges that were provided. And we compared that out to many of our other peers, and you can kind of see where we land and where we rank, fairly low. Okay, so we got some council direction. We got some things where we would like some future guidance from you on. Has to do with the thing that we put a pin in, the council consideration items for general fund, for water and sewer fund. We know that we have to adopt, well, we do know that we have to adopt this budget on the 20th, right? This budget, or some budget, we have to adopt it on the 20th. So a question as well, depending on where we land with respect to direction and clarity, we may need, do we need any further meetings or discussion to be able to make sure that when we come and when we lay eyes on each other on September 20th, that we all feel that we got the document that represents the direction that we want to go for 22-23. It's least preferred to be at the dais or, before trying to figure out numbers. That's how, I've heard of cities that have clerical errors and have adopted the wrong number because they're moving and changes. So it's least preferred to do that rather than if we need to take a little bit more time to discuss. And then any other questions or discussions that you would like to have, I'm here to provide information. That's it.
Ms. Evans-Jones, thank you very much for the presentation and the amount of information provided to hopefully give us some clarity on what we're looking at. I know we still have probably a lot to discuss as we march towards that September 20th date. So depending on how this conversation goes today will be a quick indicator of whether we meet on the 13th or other dates before then. So Councilmember Merritt, I'm going to start with you. Any comments or questions?
Sherelle, thank you very much for the presentation. We've had conversations on this, both in our public sessions and study sessions, as well as privately, along with the city manager, interim city manager Lamb. So I want to thank you for all the work that you've done. I think you couched it very well that we're looking at basically three budgets. We're looking at the current budget that we're in, the future budget for next year, and then the budget beyond that as those legislative actions may impact. So it's super important that we understand that. I want to make sure that people understand that we're grappling with this, taking this very seriously. Some of the comments that we heard in the last public hearing, the mayor spoke to some of those. Those were unfortunate and somewhat inaccurate, and you've drawn attention to that again here today. We're talking about the average. Obviously, an individual with a 800,000, as you use an example. An example was provided in that August 16th meeting of 950 or 900,000. Yes, it's going to be different for all parties. I think the key that we're looking at now, and what I'm trying to focus on, is what you emphasized. What are our fund balances in the current period as we close out and approach to this September 30th date, and where can we best utilize? And you pointed out a couple of options for our consideration. Appreciate that again. To look at where we can move some of those dollars to best utilize for projects that we know that we have. There are pent-up projects. We have long conversations with our Public Works. Mark Bentley's done a fantastic job of managing large-scale projects, and we know we have lots to deal with. We have over 400 miles of streets that have to be maintained. Talking this afternoon with Mark, I knew the budget number in the last study session last year for the budget was about $4 million a mile. Well, consider if you have a 20% increase, as we are seeing across all areas of the economy, we're looking at about $4.8 million a mile. We're not putting away money for that on a regular basis. And if people are going to, residents and businesses and ourselves are going to worry about structuring and maintaining those streets, we got to consider that. Additionally, Mr. Bentley, during the last budget session that we had, pointed out that we had, I believe it was over a million. I did translate it. It's 218 miles of water line. Maybe that's an easier number to think about. 218 miles of water line to repair. We need to make sure that we're working through that. That's going to be costly, and we know that. So I want to, the constituents out there that are hearing the message, they need to hear the full message. We have more revenue, yes. We had more expenditures projected. We haven't met that, luckily, through prudent management of departments and, guidance from the council, guidance from city administration. Those are all good things. It's a great position, and you pointed this out, Sherelle, that we're in a great position. We're not on the backside of that trying to figure out where we make up money. So I just want to make sure, my peer to my left here had, agreements, and Richard, I'm just going to, point it out. You had an agreement that when we left study session that you were on board with where we were going, and then you had a change of heart overnight. And so I'm interested to hear your positions on that based on what you heard then and now what you hear going forward, because I think we had an approach that we were seemingly agreeable to as a council, and that changed overnight. And since then, the level of interest, the level of concern being voiced accurately and sometimes inaccurately has, risen to a drumbeat that's pretty loud. Let's not avoid the elephant in the room. But we're trying to grapple with those elements and do the right thing. No one's up here throwing money away. I want to make, that's, facetious to even state such a comment. We are being prudent to this. You didn't say that. Someone else said that.
Thank you for clarifying.
Just making total, those statements had been made in the public forum. And so I want everyone to know out there listening in the room here today that we take this seriously. And to some of my peers that were sat on this council, this kind of stuff can make you sick. I mean, it really can. It make, you don't sleep. You're reading hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents. You're hearing from the community, and it's tough, folks. But guess what? I signed up for this, and I knew that, and I'm doing my damnedest, and I'm sorry, to make this decision that impacts and addresses the needs of the city going forward. I've used the term a long time now, the long arc. It's not about the short term. You have to look at the short term, but you have to look at the long arc. These are important decisions. And I said it during the study session, there are going to be some terse conversations and some terse positions, that are really going to have to be expressed. And we can do it collegially, we can do it professionally, and that's just my demeanor, and that's what I'm going to stop with, and I'll turn it back to the mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Merritt. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've done some calculations. I sent out a couple of emails. I challenge anyone to say that my numbers are inaccurate. Appreciate you clarifying that I didn't say we're throwing money away. I can't control what other people are saying out there. Fundamentally, I did agree with, during the budget retreat sessions, I favored the water bill credit. I had a change of heart after a couple of days because what I came to realize, and admittedly I didn't fully understand how this water bill credit approach was really designed and who all it impacted, who all it didn't impact. So when I understood that businesses weren't going to receive any relief, consider that with the fact that businesses pay 75% of our tab, to me seems like a slap in the face, number one. That folks who rent single-family homes, and I'd be curious, Sherelle, out of the number that you had given, 5,600 residences in Farmers Branch are at or below value of $327,000. Generally, how many of those might be single-family residential rental units, where a water bill credit of 132 would give back our tax dollars, because that's what all this money is, our tax dollars to the renter and not to the homeowner,
Okay.
right?
Let's give some answers. So we know that 66% of the parcels that we have either homestead and/or an over 65. That's where the majority of our parcels are. The quick answer to your question is we can't know for sure, but we know that the majority of our residential parcels have some sort of exemption that requires the person to live in the house. We do know that those requirements enable, for instance, a senior, if they are no longer able to live in their home and their relative or someone is living in there and they had to go live somewhere else, the laws allow that exemption stays in place, you see? That's why I'm saying we know who has exemptions and how many have exemptions that require them to live in the house, but we couldn't possibly say these percentage is rented and this percentage is not. We do know that in order to have a homestead exemption, you are required to live in the property, but you can have up to a 2-year living elsewhere period. So I'm answering your question with facts that we know 66% of our residential parcels have some sort of exemption that requires them to live in the home. But we also know some other facts in terms of the way the rules and the laws, et cetera, are interpreted.
Okay,
Okay.
Understood. So that would mean, if I'm following your theology
Theology.
correctly,
That makes me a little financial preacher of sorts.
yes, that 34% of the homes that would be receiving a water bill credit are rentals, right? Presumably, because if 66% are homesteaded, owner lives in the home, they pay a water bill, then 34%, the owner doesn't live in the home, and the owner doesn't presumably pay the water bill, the renter does. So following that line of thinking, a third of our $1.15 million that we're giving back to people through a water bill credit, a little over 300,000 of that is going to renters, not the homeowners, the property owners that pay the taxes. And I understand renters pay taxes through their rent, but they're paying rent. They're not paying taxes. The property owner is paying those taxes. So just all of that to say, it's a problem for me, right, that we're giving that money to the renters and the property owner is not benefiting from, that rebate, whatever you want to call it. Lastly, to categorically say $132 credit across the board to everybody, regardless of the value of your home, is an appropriate and fair distribution of everyone's tax dollars, to me, doesn't add up. You may differ with that opinion, and it's quite okay that you do, but I stand on that position.
Repeat that again.
Giving everybody $132 even, regardless of the value of your home, to me is not a fair distribution of this refund, rebate, whatever you want to call
Okay.
it.
I thought you were saying something about the way it didn't add up. I was like, say what now?
No,
Okay,
no.
got it.
It adds
Got
up.
it, got it.
Just for some,
one-
it adds up to be more, and
Just
others
right.
it adds
That's
up to be
right.
a lot less. And to me, everybody pays the same tax rate. The tax rate is what's meaningful to residents, to taxpayers. That's what's meaningful. I realize reducing a tax rate comes at a much higher cost. A much higher cost. but that's what people understand. And so lastly, I'll say that I may have been sold under my lack of understanding during the budget retreat process, but when I began to understand this more in depthly, I'm not sold. So I'm not sold, and a lot of others are not sold. So either we've got to do a better job of selling this, or we have to come up with a different idea.
Can I say this? I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling anything. I am acutely aware of the financial situation of the city. I live this, I breathe this, I am this every day. I am acutely aware of what I hear from each of you in terms of what you wanted to see in the budget, and what you see is a wholehearted attempt to provide you what you asked for, some sort of relief, because people are hurting, people need help, people need help, people need help. That's what we heard. And so because I have an intimate knowledge of how these finances work, what I was trying to do is propose a solution that provided for what I heard you say you wanted, using different levers, because we are blessed in this city to have options. Some cities don't have this option. Some cities are cutting the tax rate because their calculations require it. That piece you may or may not be aware of. Oh, such and such is doing this, such and such is doing that. They could have run their calculation and they have no choice. Today, we have choices. So I want to be clear. I'm not selling anything. I'm providing you all with financial advice, and it's up to you if you want to take it.
So we can agree to disagree, because what you're asking me to do is to buy into this idea of the water bill credit.
I'm gonna interject real quick. Sherelle, thank you so much, took the information given to her from previous councils based on ideas that they wanted to see and how they wanted this budget implemented before you were on this council, that have worked their way into this budget. And so that request of what we were trying to do, taking into consideration SB2, taking into consideration future legislative actions and other things that might negatively impact the city in the future, we were trying to figure out, how do we keep a rate high enough that gives future councils, which will not include me, the most amount of flexibility to do what they need to do to take care of this city? But how can we also give residents the tax kind of relief that they were looking for? $131 is $131. But how can we slice that to where it is better for our city, puts us in a much better position long-term to address our needs with rising cost, repairs, things that we need to do, just slashing the budget, that's coming out of the general fund base rate, and finding unique and creative ways to do that was what we try to do. Thank you very much for accomplishing that. This is not Sherelle or any staff member's job to sell this budget. This is our job to sell the budget, and the budget that we are giving to the public and for them to buy off on. And so from that standpoint, that falls to us at this dais. And so whoever is selling that is 6 of us. It's 6 of us talking to the community, telling them, this is why we're doing what we're doing, this is what we're investing in, this is what you're going to get, and this is what you're going to get back. Yes, it might not look like this, but it looks like the same amount of money in your pocket. And if we go with a 5-cent decrease, for 64% of our homes that are under the $327,000 number, their percentage share of that is going to go down, while everyone above the 64% is going to go up. Now, I'm fine with that. However you all want to play that out, what I thought was most equitable, Sherelle said it fantastically. We're in the business of helping people. All we hear is that people are hurting, and we're trying to find them relief. And yeah, there's some renters that might get some money back, but they're the ones paying the water bills. You want to know how we know how some of the renters are? Ask Leo. Most renters sign up for their own water bill account. That's how we know to come in and get a new CO, check out the home, make sure it's good living conditions. For people that live in this community, that sends their kids to this community, or send their kids to our schools, shop at our stores, eat at our restaurants, they're part of this community too. And, when I think about the global aspect of this, our top 30 taxpayers are all commercial bases. 21 of those are apartment complexes. Those apartment complexes make up 22% of our tax base. That is staggering. Now, let me tell you something. When we cut that tax rate, that money is not going to make rent cheaper for those residents. That money is not going to make their water bill any cheaper for those residents. And granted, this plan doesn't have that, but it's a zero-sum effect. All that's going to do is pad the 21 people that own those buildings. And based on what I heard here, the renters sounded like someone we just need to take for granted, instead of the people in this community. Now, I don't know how to give those money back to the people in the apartment complexes, but I know what I do know that benefits them is the investment in the amenities and the things that we have in this community. How are we redeveloping certain areas of the city? And a lot of that takes planning, it takes funds, it takes vision, and a lot of that is what you saw in this budget. Now, Sherelle, thank you again. To shorten what I was trying to say, what she presented us is what we asked her to present us before your time.
Before my time, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, I get that, but I
And
just want you
may I-
to know, so attacking her for that is
Don't make
not
any
right.
mistake. I respect the amount of work and effort that this takes. You know it far better than I do. We'll readily admit that. But we're not taking renters for granted if we take an approach that excludes them from returning tax dollars. What we're doing right now, in my mind, is that we're taking our businesses, our biggest contributors to our economy, out of the equation. And I'm not saying that if we give this money back to the businesses, well, they'll just reinvest it in the community. Some will, some won't. Maybe a lot of them will. Who knows? We can't control that. In my mind, it's about doing what's right. And doing what's right costs us more. It always does. And that's just where I stand. And I challenge you, I challenge anyone to look at my numbers and to look at my communications and accuse me of trying to start up.
Have you shared your communication with the rest of the council? Because I know I haven't gotten it.
I have sent it to my district.
Right, but if we are going to be asked about your communication, wouldn't you think that you would share that with the 6 of us, with the 5 others?
Be happy to put you on my mailing list.
That'd be great. I mean, and I think this is that cordial professionalism that we're talking about. Yes, you're entitled to communicate, but you're not entitled, as we've said, to your own facts. And yes, if you feel like your
My facts are not wrong, David.
one at a time.
My facts are not wrong.
I'm not saying that they are, but
You
nobody,
just did. You said I was not entitled to my own facts. That's exactly what you just said.
your facts related to, you just mentioned a moment ago that you took 2 days. You sent that message the next morning to interim city manager at 9 a.m. You didn't take 2 days, you did it overnight.
Do an Open Records Request Act. I'm just looking back and I'm just thinking about my thought process. So whether it was 2 days or 1 day, I thought through it. And when I communicated to my constituents where I stood, I told them voluntarily, I originally was here, but after some thought, I'm now
You're
here.
entitled to change your opinion, that's fine. We're now getting more facts, and the facts are changing, obviously, to the betterment. And I agree with the mayor that Sherelle's not selling this, and this is for us to craft. And so while you may not agree with this particular proposal, the idea is, what is your proposal? And what is, a proposal that we could all rally behind? And we've heard the mayor say, and rightfully so, we should all be behind whatever we come up with. It would look silly if it's 3-2 or 4-1 or what have you. We need to, as he said, the 6 of us need to sell this to the community. So what I haven't heard you say is what your proposal is. I've heard through the grapevine, the 5-cent reduction is what we need. Well, no, it's not, because the numbers at the time in August didn't match that. The numbers are different now. We're getting new information. So let's look at that and craft a solution. I want to partner with each and every one of us up here that we make a good solution. And we can debate fervently, if you will, tersely, as I said earlier, about our positions. And nobody's calling one right or one wrong, but it's got to be where if you have $1 million property, that is one way to look at your impact to the community, one way. And as a data person and as a finance person, there are a lot of other things going on. Sales tax, we talk about the businesses and how, based on our own information, sales tax are up. Sales tax are up across the state. So businesses are apparently doing well at the moment. Now, could it change in 30, 60 days? Yes, it could. But we need to be good stewards, and we've been challenged to be good stewards of our funds going forward. And we giving it away, whether it's in one form or another, is not necessarily being a good steward.
Don't know where giving it away came from. Those are your words, not mine.
I agree.
I would suggest some blend so that we include businesses in receiving back some tax dollars. They use it how they want to use it, but some blend. And about the sales and use tax, we're $5.5 million beyond what we thought we would be. And you just told us a moment ago that in a few years, we may be $5.5 million below that now. Okay, so we're back to where we were, right?
Well, my point, a point that I wanted to make with respect to this particular credit and this opportunity with respect to businesses, at least in its current state, not participating in the proposal and them being left out, or what our data is showing us now with the level in which sales and use tax is performing over expectations, with the level in which sales and use tax is performing over expectations statewide, is that by and large, the businesses within this community that generated that money are doing at least better than what they were last year, because that's kind of the basis for how we bake the number. So that's one piece of it. The second piece with respect to our businesses and their participation with this proposal in its current form has to do with the fact that businesses, new businesses, for instance, receive the benefit of city funding with respect to our economic development outreach activities, which we set aside significant amounts of expenditures to make sure that we can help bring new businesses to our community and provide a welcoming, open door to them. So I'm saying that the data doesn't support that by and large businesses within our community are hurting, and I'm saying we provide expenditure and we help our new and developing businesses with respect to the funding that's set aside for economic development.
Understood. And I keep hearing, we know people are hurting, and we've heard that from residents. This isn't all about helping people that are hurting. That's important to us, absolutely. But this is more about doing what's right and keeping in mind what residents understand. And that's the part where we as a council have a responsibility to sell. And I can't sell it if my heart's not in it. And I don't believe that by leaving our businesses out of the equation, I don't believe that that's fair.
Are you proposing to put the businesses into the equation in terms of a water credit? Is that what you're saying? I'm trying, like, at this point, I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to come away with this conversation with an understanding of what we want to tweak, do, change, augment, so that I can present you and this public a document that we all can get behind and that we all feel comfortable in adopting on the 20th. So if that is not something that you're comfortable with, what is?
If it's in the water bill for businesses, that's an option. But I think that may be a 2-cent tax rate reduction and the water bill credit together. Where does that get us? About 3 million? Under 3 million? That would include businesses in the equation, but it would favor residents, right? Because residents are going to get the $132. And I realize businesses are going to get 3 times the benefit as a residents and a 2-cent tax rate decrease.
Okay,
But it includes businesses. And
as long as we good with the future. As long as we're good with the future,
I think
it's all
at
good.
least seeing that option, right? Seeing the costs.
As long as we're good with how it flows down and how it impacts us in the future. If you all like a 2-cent reduction, I love it. We'll figure out how to make it work. But I want to make sure that we are looking at that with eyes wide open, because 2 cents pulls roughly $1.6 million out of the equation, and it's going to keep pulling it out of the equation in the future. So if we're good with that, let's provide me direction, and then away we can go.
I would like to see the numbers.
What do you mean?
Well, I want to see what it means to a business to give them the 2-cent tax rate reduction.
It,
I want to understand from residents if that's an acceptable. I've gotten emails from residents all week, repeatedly, tax rate reduction, tax rate reduction.
so you're saying you need time now to couch this and have that discussion with multiple businesses to understand what this means to them?
No, I think we'll probably hear from them tonight. If they're willing to show up and speak tonight, then I am all ears. We have a very short amount of time to decide on this budget, and we're pretty far down the tracks already. I realize the clock is ticking. But we need to pay more attention to the tax rate reduction approach before we count it out entirely.
Okay? That's a perspective.
Thank you.
Understood.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Wow, okay. Well, assuming we don't want to be here all night, I'm going to try to be a little bit brief, but I have to make a couple of comments. And I want to compliment you, Sherelle, and your team on the work you've done and in the revisions that you've done and that looks like you're going to be undertaking. And we were all elected here to represent our residents. That includes businesses, that includes individuals, retired folks, children who obviously don't vote for us, but that they're parts of the families here. And I hope and I think we all want to pull in the same direction and do what's right for the city. And we can quibble on big things, on medium things, on little things, but number one thing I'd like to say, I hope we can do this with dignity and respect and not personalize things. Obviously, our political culture right now is very animated. So I take that seriously myself. But when we disagree, I think we can do it amicably. And we can discuss things. As we had the 2-day budget retreat, we all went down the line here. Does anyone else want to come back tomorrow morning? We'd reserve that. Sherelle was here, all the department heads were here and available to come in the next morning. Each one of us went down the line, said, no, we've had 2 days. We've had opportunities to discuss the past, the present, the future with all the department heads, budgets, wish lists, plans, and we were all good with that. And then everything changed. And that's one thing I'd like to say. Second point, I'd like to also commend my colleague, Mr. Merritt. I think what you said at the opening is very timely and very well said, far more eloquent than I am. Third point, again, I don't want to personalize this, but I don't think people elected us to just sit here and fight and argue. If we need to do that, we can do that in executive session. That's my opinion. But I would like to say, Mr. Jackson, I do not believe that Mr. Merritt was accusing you of distorting your numbers or your numbers not being good. I think what he was trying to say to you is that you said, oh, I sent out an email, a newsletter, whatever it is, and all my numbers are great. What he's trying to say, I believe, is that, well, we're not privy to that. We're not in your district, so we didn't get that. And we also hear from people and get emails, and they say, well, I heard this, I heard that. So you're kind of putting your colleagues in a weird position to react to something that they don't know about. And I understand and respect that you're new on council, but maybe you need to think about that. And if you'd like, you can put me on your mailing list. Then I'll be a little bit better prepared and in the know what people are talking about. And again, we have a large city now with lots of new residents, thousands, and there are more moving here every day. Yeah, and then back to the budget, well, another point I'd like to make. Talking about doing a tax cut and, well, the point about renters and homeowners, I think we misfocus on that so much. People that rent here in apartments or homes, many of them, I'm in touch with some of them, many of them want to be homeowners here. They moved here, they like it, they got married, they want to start a family, they've started a family. I've helped a few folks relocate here to Farmers Branch, and some rent. And they say, hey, help me with my finances and this and that. I want to buy in a year or two. And that's wonderful, but whether they rent or they own, they send their kids to our schools, they're playing in our parks, et cetera, and enjoy all of our amenities, our concerts, and love the community and participate in things. So yes, I can see your mathematical argument. If we give the water relief, well, a renter pays that, and the homeowner or the landlord or the corporation that may be in New York or California that owns that house or property, they get the benefit. Or they don't get the benefit, but they get the tax benefits of being property owners and landlords. And if we do a tax decrease, they're not going to call up all their renters or send emails, oh, hey, all you tenants out there in the apartments, guess what? We're going to cut your rent next month. It's not going to happen. So there's not a perfect world, but I think what's been presented and what we had discussed, and I think most of us felt we'd pretty much agreed to, the bigger picture things. A couple of weeks ago, we were all on board with it. Yeah. Those are some of the points I just wanted to make. And one last thing, I come from a background in banking, finance, sales, marketing, and management. I understand selling and marketing, but I have to object to the words, well, you're trying to get me to buy into this, or I have to sell this, or we have to sell that. I don't want to be pedantic, but words and language are important. And I look at my role as explaining things. Explaining the benefits of having a dog park a couple of years ago. Well, it costs money. I don't have a dog. Fact. But I had to explain, not sell, And again, I'm in business. We buy and sell properties, etc. But I think it's better if we say we need to explain. We need to educate. And we're not selling and buying a product. And again, I think words and language are important. And so I hope we can go forward without saying I'm buying or selling something. We're not selling products here. We're all elected here for service to our residents and the city. And we all want the best for the city on a long-term basis. And just in summary, I'd just like to say, I think that the proposal to do the water kind of rebate, refund, whatever you want to call it, is a fair option. Is it a perfect option? No. But that's not what we're in the business of. We're in the business of being prudent with the city's assets, planning for the long term. We did the inauguration with the new fire truck, $1 million fire truck. That's not for the next 6 months. That's for the next 20 years. And we have to think and plan down the road, the comprehensive plan that we have underway. It's a 1.5-year process. And we're hearing from people, we all are, I'm in favor of this, I'm opposed to that. Well, fine, but we're not thinking about today or tomorrow. And so that's all I wanted to say right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Roman.
Thank you, Mayor. Just hearing some of the discussion, I just think it's important for me to note that the same concerns that I've held true to from the beginning of the presentation at the budget retreat are the same opinions that I still hold. My position hasn't really changed. I've expressed some concerns that I still sort of have, that I've heard some residents mention to me. I know that we're talking a lot about SB2 and how it impacts the future financial standing of the city. We would be limited to increasing our rate by 3.5% of the no new revenue rate. And what I'm hearing is that our expenses are increasing at a rate that might exceed 3.5. Is there another way to increase the tax rate beyond the 3.5?
Yes, so SB 2 requires that if you go beyond the 3.5%, that it requires a special vote. So, and the timing of the vote, you would kind of almost need to know, you would kind of almost need to be doing your budgeting a year in advance to know where you're headed. I mean, we do forecasts, et cetera, but you couldn't, for instance, like right now, do the vote. The vote would have needed to already have happened. So that makes it difficult for cities to be able to call for that vote because it requires a significant amount of foreplanning and knowledge about exactly where your finances are going to be at the time of budgeting. But yes, you can exceed that 3.5%, but it requires a vote from your citizens.
Mm-hmm. So from the beginning, I expressed concern about the water proposal. My concern was always that I didn't think that it really represented a 5% savings for everybody, and we've talked about that. It doesn't apply to apartment renters, it doesn't apply to businesses, it doesn't apply to landowners who rent their property, and it doesn't apply to condo owners who don't submeter. So there's a lot of people that it's really not affecting, and it's difficult because I understand why we're doing it from a financial standpoint, but the principle of the matter is that it's not affecting a whole lot of individuals, that I want to make sure everybody's represented equally. That's the problem, that fundamental problem that I'm having with it. One of the questions that I do have, just out of curiosity, is I see that 64% of the parcels that are within the city are at or below the average value of the home in Farmers Branch. The remaining 36%, I'm kind of curious the breakdown between the 64 and the 36% of the parcels that make up the taxes. Is it more of the taxes come from the people in that 36%? Is it an even split? Is it more for the 64%? I'm just trying to understand that. And
well, are you asking?
Maybe that's a calculation for. So,
No.
So
we
the
can.
taxes for that 64%, what is that number that they bring in revenue? And then the remaining individuals in that 36%, what is the revenue that they generate through property taxes?
We can definitely run the calculation and figure out, of this group of people here, whether they generate more or less because they're 64% and it's not like a 50-50 split. If it were a 50-50 split, I'd be like, well, obviously the people with the higher property tax base are, all things held constant. But we can run that number and I'm happy to tell you what that would shake out to be. I will tell you that I played with the number at a variety of different property tax rates. Property values. And that's how I kind of, was figuring, I'm aware of what our highest and what our lowest amounts in terms of our values of our properties. The highest being a little bit more than $1.4 million, the lowest being $90,000. And I was curious, like, how much or little people are receiving, because you're right, it's a scale. 132 works out, it's going to mean different things to different properties. And when I started hearing 2 cent, 2.5 cent, we want, those amounts. I'm like, well, at $800,000 or below, you're at least getting to, that amount that you're asking for in this particular, and that's going to pick up the lion's share of your parcels. I mean, I can go back and get you the numbers. I have the details, probably at that laptop sitting in that empty space, but at $800,000 or below, that's the majority of your parcels there in terms of percentage of residential parcels. And at that amount, you're at least getting 2.75 cent, the equivalent of a 2.75 cent reduction to a property owner at that amount with a homestead exemption. See, we have had the situation as well where my financial integrity was questioned in terms of how calculations were generated, and those numbers were generated and not taking into consideration the homestead exemption, which is available to most, the reason that we present that information that way is because we look at how our data splits in our community, and what we're trying to do is talk to those people who we're trying to provide the information that is most applicable to our residents. And because we have more people that have homestead exemptions of some sort that, allow that amount to be reduced from their tax base, that's the reason why we perform that calculation that way, rather than just taking rate times value divided by 100. That's, the sky is falling method of providing tax calculations. Okay.
And the other thing I learned when I had my meeting with John is that we're receiving an additional amount of sales taxes than we originally projected, and then our expenses came down lower. So to me, or ended up being lower than what we expected. So for me, I see, okay, we have additional revenue, we have less expenses, and so we're still at that same rate. And so in my mind, I thought that we might be looking at doing something that would take the revenue that was the additional revenue and the savings from the expenses that we didn't use up, and be able to provide something valuable for residents and for businesses.
Okay.
Can you kind of walk me through your mindset on how that may not be something that's
Yes.
likely?
Gotta bring all the books up here, all of them.
If I may, I think you hit on a very important point. So we came here tonight with what we believed was really good news. We've been very conservative in projecting revenues. We've been a little bit scared about what was going to happen at the comptroller's office with sales tax. We actually had one of our large sales taxpayers already start abiding by the proposed law before it was enacted, and we had to get with them and kind of correct that. So we're coming tonight with what we hoped was going to be really good news. We all, or our team, and everyone on our team is interested in providing the best quality of life for our residents and our businesses. And I think we have some unique opportunities with this unexpected flow of cash to somehow invest that back in the community. There's a variety of ways to do that, and we'd like to work with you collectively on creative ways to do that. It could be using some of that to pay large expenses in next year's budget in advance of that, which would free up money in next year's budget. It could be, I think David Merritt had brought up, hey, didn't we have a tax dividend program at one time? We did in, I think it was 1997. We went and looked that up, where an amount of money was refunded to every business and resident proportionally. That's a nightmare for Sherelle's office to try to figure out how to get about 1,200 checks out of the door, but that's an option for us. So we would love to talk about solutions on how to get there. I think we're all on the same page in terms of wanting to give relief back to the community, whether it's a resident, whether it's a business. And from our perspective, if, we treat renters the same. They get free trash pickup, they get every service that we provide. If they call the police, we're there. If they have an issue, our ambulance is going to show up. So we treat everybody that comes in this community, visitors alike, we treat them with respect and admiration that they're here. So we would love to get around coming up with what can we do with this excess money How do we get relief back to our residents that's meaningful? And I know the buzzword is, well, tax cut, but if it's money, if it's really truly money, I think we can accomplish that. If it's a tax cut, I think Sherelle's advice was, hey, we're going to fill that in a couple of years. So let's just be mindful of that. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but it just means the environment of pay-as-you-go is going to be more limited in the future, and we're going to have more and more bond initiatives for things that we normally provided. And that may be okay. Maybe that's something that residents understand better, is we have, water and sewer issues that we cannot address currently in this budget, and we're going to have, a tax bond for your consideration to fix that. The scary part is if it fails, you have those problems. Anyway, I get off my soapbox.
You asked me about, and I want to rephrase it because I don't think I fully understood the question. So you asked me about the additional funding that came in during the 21-22 year in terms of revenues, expenses being a little bit less than expected. And you thought that you would see more relief in there. Talk to me about what you meant when you said that. I don't know how to respond to it because I don't think I understand.
Obviously, I've not done city budgets ever. So in my...
It's a beast.
In my little brain, it's, what I'm computing is, okay, in the previous year, because I know we're planning for 22, 23, in the previous year, we were able to save some money in expenses, and we came out ahead of revenue. So that money will then carry over to the next fiscal year, which is 22, 23, that will be available for us to use in whatever way we see fit.
Not correct.
Okay.
That's the one piece of it. So in terms of expenditures, they don't automatically carry over. So that kind of gets to that point where I was on this slide and I was talking about how we had better performance than we expected, but all these expenditures that are sitting here that aren't spent will die. I don't know a better way of,
Where does it go?
It rolls, it doesn't evaporate. It rolls down to a fund balance, but it doesn't automatically rebudget itself during the upcoming year. So that's why we were asking if council had an interest in moving funding into our capital projects funds, which would enable spending to take place over multiple years. Capital projects fund is set up to spend money over a long period of time to build some sort of larger asset. And so it enables us to be able to, if we are inclined to transfer funds into those, that would allow for us to plan for the future. In terms of we're saving money on 21, 22, or we had better experience, compared to budget on 21, 22. So that ought to automatically relate to 22, 23. Think of these as two different balanced budgets. So yes, you can reduce revenues here, because that's effectively what you would do if you would reduce the tax rate. You can reduce revenues on 22, 23. And let's say you do that by a penny or 1.6. But you see how the difference between these two numbers is tight? So we would be looking to trim something, to move something to a different period. And if I get an understanding from you all what you want to see, I can try to provide that. But it doesn't automatically, fall down to the bottom, or it doesn't, expenses that are not spent here don't automatically get rebudgeted in here.
So it ends up in general fund?
It will stay in general fund, and it will be a part of fund balance if it's not expended. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So if at the end of the year, those two items end up in the general fund, then, and we're planning for 22 to 23, then can we not plan ahead and say, okay, well, knowing that this money is going to end up automatically in this fund, let's plan for lesser amount equal to that transfer that's going to happen to the general fund at the end of the fiscal year to try and lower our tax
That's,
Tax-
I think I
You see what I'm
track, I think I track what you're saying. It is possible for us to say, instead of, because there's transfers built into this expenditure that for 22, y'all can see my cursor, right? Okay. So there's transfers that are built into this 22, 23 amount. And we can basically consider some of those transfers that are paying for capital items, and we could try to budget for those things using excess, using some things that we have available to us during the 21, 22 year, freeing this up to let us, it's kind of like the wishbone connected to the hip bone. Yes, we could do that. I just need to get the direction. So that is an option available as well.
Sure. So,
But what we will want to do is each one of these things has to balance. We don't want big negative number here because we cut a revenue and we didn't cut the expenses. So that's what we want to try to avoid.
yeah, so, I had a great mentor in college that once told me, he said, Omar, you need to be constructive with your feedback. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, don't just go up there and complain, and provide some feedback. Even if it's not right, you can still try. And so I wanted to make sure that I was at least constructive, because what I'm hearing from you is I need to know what direction to go. So I'm thinking again in my little brain that doesn't know much about city budgets, and I'm still working through it with you. That's why we've had very frequent meetings about city budgets recently, to ask a lot of who, what, when, where, and why type questions. And another thing I wanted to mention, I remember when I was running for council, and I decided to meet with you and kind of talk about the budget. And I met with you and Charles, and I said, well, from a city budget perspective, how do we increase revenue? And, it's not like a business, it's very different. And then I said, okay, well, what about expenses? How do we decrease expenses? And you said, well, sometimes we'll look at maybe moving projects to a future year, or maybe we'll look at spreading something over multiple years. And so I don't know if that's something that we might be able to do. Again, I'm just trying to be constructive and provide some options, and maybe they're not an option, but I wanted to at least bring it up.
Yeah, we do that currently. So an example of kind of spreading a big thing over multiple years, a good example of that would be like the purchase of a fire truck. So included in...
And I think we're planning for that in advance for a future purchase,
Right. And so we do, for big things that we have that are larger expenditures, for, fire trucks is a good example of that. You'll see us in these, every expenditure, we'll set aside a little piece of it, little piece. And what we're trying to do is minimize the shock to the expenditures overall by coming back and saying, well, now it's time to make the $1.7 million purchase. So what are we going to do? So we already currently utilize that for large expenditures like our fire trucks or ambulances, or we utilize that for updates and expenditures to our city facilities. We set aside smaller amounts each time, and it enables us to take off little bites of and that's kind of getting to that pay-go that has helped us to get that bond rating that I'm so proud of. So we're currently utilizing those avenues as well.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is there's no new opportunities to do something similar with some of our current projects.
I heard what you said. What you said is a good idea. We can look to shift some things off of 22, 23 and move them to 21, 22. I'm just trying to understand how much we're talking about.
Right.
And if we are all the way down the tax reduction path, or if we are trying to save off some issues that we may have in the future,
I certainly want to be mindful of where we might end up in the future, which is why I was like, oh, well, it's kind of neat that through your work we've been able to ensure that our revenues came out the way they did and our expenses came out the way they did for the current fiscal year. And so I don't know what that number looks like. I wanted to propose two things I was thinking. The first one is if there is a way to include more of the groups who I mentioned won't be benefiting from that water credit, if there's some way to make sure that everybody is, more groups are benefiting from that, and that the groups that are benefiting in an equitable way that is reflective of their property value. Maybe there isn't, but I wanted to present that first option. The second one is just figuring out what cutting the tax rate in addition to the water rate that we currently have in place and benefiting those specific groups, but cutting the tax rate using the two amounts that we've already talked about from this current fiscal year, the savings in expenses and the overage that we received in sales tax. I don't know what that number looks like. I don't want to throw out a number and then you're like, oh my gosh, and I don't want to throw out another number and it's like, oh yeah, well that's super easy, and then I don't know. I just want to make sure we find the right number.
What do you want?
I would like 3 cents.
Not saying I can do it.
Possible, but-
I'm just trying to understand where we are.
Yeah.
When you were talking about figuring out how to have more groups benefit, let me stew on that and see if that is possible. When you talk about how more groups or all the groups that are participating can benefit at an equitable rate, that gets to be a little trickier because of my understanding of how the water rate system works. And I think that becomes a little bit more tricky. And so we didn't propose a graduated system we didn't leave that off the table to be mean. We were thinking about what our existing ERP system, our existing water billing system could do in terms of the way that we might make a change to 8,000 accounts. And this was kind of, and as many of you have noted, this is the best of a bunch of, the best opportunity of a bunch of difficult options. If you pull this string over here, you have this unintended consequence, or when you pull this string over here, you have this thing happening. So the reason that the flat rate was proposed is because that's what we're best able to push through our system. Okay.
Were you done? I apologize.
I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay. To piggyback off of what Councilmember Roman said, one of the ways that we can look at this is if we can offset expenditures from 2021, 2022 that are going to be paid in 2022, 2023 to lower that number.
Yep.
The 4.5% merit increase for staff is about 1.6, 1.7 million?
No. That number, the component of just the merit is like less than 600,000. So
Is that with police and fire?
no, I'm just talking merit.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was playing with those, and if you understand like just a percentage change, you move that by a percentage point, you might be getting $100,000 or something back, or costing an additional $100,000.
Well, thinking back to, I guess, police and fire then, because it was a much larger number.
Right.
And
Bigger pool.
We've brought up the idea of maybe prepaying some of that as a one-time payment rather than, what if we just shifted that payment a little bit early? Like September 29th.
I would need to talk to that guy back there with the mustache.
I don't know what can or cannot be done there,
Yeah,
but if you speed it up, it happens in this year. And then you reduce some expenditures in next year.
Yeah.
Which the money's
We
still
can
going
consider
out.
that. We can consider that.
Mr. Bentley, the Cooks Creek project, is that scheduled for this October?
It has to, because the deadline is
Can you come to the,
Oh, yeah, that was the other thing I was gonna.
Yeah, we received grant funding, and there is a deadline on that grant funding of November of '23, and it's going to take us a year to build this project.
Okay.
So we have to get, actually, I wanted to put it on this month, like the 20th, get it awarded, but, until I get the funding in place, I can't award the project.
So is that 1.6 included in next year's budget?
1.6 is, that's what we're trying to work out to get into next year's budget, so.
So that's a hole that needs to be filled.
That's
Not a
right.
hole
I need $1.6 million to make up the difference. It's either add it or I take it away from somewhere else and do it.
Totally got you. Okay.
Can you remind us how many houses will come out of the floodplain as a result of that
I
project?
believe there's 60 some odd houses and 40 of those will come out of the floodplain.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Councilmember Roman, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I understood that we were going to have the discussion about whether it was for the police pay, whether it was going to be a lump sum or just a straight up raise at a later time. I wanted to make sure that I stated my support for one of them, and I would support of course, just a regular salary increase after discussions with different individuals in the Police Officers Association, and based off of their research, it seems like 9% is exactly what they need to be competitive. And so I want to make sure that we're not losing any police officers as the city continues to grow. Public safety is something that's really important to me, and something that I heard when I went knocking door to door. People wanted to make sure that their neighborhoods were safe and secure, and so I think this investment would be wisely used to our police and fire.
All right. Based on the time, we have this as an agenda item, continue discussion all night long, a little bit later after our public hearing. So with that, I'm going to stop the discussion on this right now. Thank you, Ms. Evans-Jones. And move to A4, discussion of future agenda items. Does anyone have anything they'd like to bring up at this time? Councilmember Merritt.
Yes, Mayor. In the past, we've usually had a list of ongoing future items that had already been discussed. Currently, we don't see that list being appended to our materials. It would be nice if we could have that going forward. And I'm sorry I didn't talk to the city secretary for that, and I'm not throwing them under the bus, but it's good to have that. I think there's plenty for us on our docket right now that I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
I just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks. Councilmember Jackson.
Nothing to add, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Not right now, thank you.
Councilmember Roman.
I just had a question, sorry. Are we getting together September the 13th?
I am going to make a recommendation that we put a date for this, not only the 13th, but a backup date for the 14th.
Okay, understood, thank you.
Don't need to use it, but should it arise. So, based on what I've heard here today, because I think Ms. Evans-Jones is going to need some time to come back with some of the solutions to move some of this around to accomplish some of the new goals that have been said here today. Okay. With that, I'm going to go ahead and read an executive session. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to Section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code to conduct and discuss the evaluation of the municipal court judge. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to Section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code to discuss the city manager recruitment process and review of potential candidates. The time is 5:15. We'll break for dinner and meet upstairs to conduct executive session.